My daughter-in-law, Veronica, a woman who measured a person's worth by the brand of their handbag, mocked my old clothes. She did it at a party in her own home, a sprawling, minimalist palace of glass and steel that she believed was the ultimate symbol of her husband's success. She had no idea that the very walls that echoed with her derisive laughter were, in fact, mine. She didn't know that the anonymous investors who owned her precious house, her stage, her entire life, were not a faceless corporation, but a quiet old woman in a mended cardigan. She thought she was the queen of the castle. She only started to understand her true position when I showed her the contract that made me her landlady, and her my tenant. Hi everyone, I'm Grandma Beatrice. My name is Beatrice Dunn. I am 81 years old, and for most of my life, I have been a ghost. A quiet, unassuming, and very wealthy ghost. My late husband, Arthur, and I built a life on a simple principle. Live modestly, invest wisely, and never, ever let your money speak louder than your character. Arthur owned a company that manufactured the most boring, but most essential, components for industrial machinery. Ball bearings, gaskets, specialized bolts. He was a genius of the mundane, and he made a fortune from it. We lived in the same small brick house for 50 years, drove the same sensible car, and found our joy not in things, but in each other, and in our son, Thomas. This is a story about the difference between wealth and riches. It's about the lies we tell ourselves about what is valuable. And it is a story about a lease agreement. A simple, legally binding document that became the weapon in a quiet, undeclared war that had been raging in my own family for years. Before I serve this eviction notice, I would be so grateful for your support. Please, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your presence here, your willingness to listen to an old woman who was once invisible, is the only asset that truly matters to me now. To understand Veronica's particular brand of snobbery, you must first understand the lie that her entire life was built upon. When our son, Thomas, a brilliant but hopelessly impractical engineer, wanted to start his own tech company, he had a vision, but no capital. He was our only child, our world. Arthur and I made a decision. We would fund him, but we would do it anonymously. A man needs to feel he has built his own success, Arthur had said in his quiet, wise way. If he knows it's us, he will always feel like a boy playing with his father's money. We will be his silent partners, the best kind of partners. So, we created a holding corporation, a dry, legal entity with a bland, forgettable name. Northwood Investments. Through Northwood, we gave Thomas the seed money he needed. And when his company, Innovate Dynamics, began to take off, and he needed a larger headquarters, a more impressive base of operations to attract investors, Northwood purchased a stunning piece of commercial real estate, a beautiful, modern building with a glass atrium and a view of the city skyline. And when Thomas married Veronica, a woman whose ambition was as vast and as shiny as a new diamond, and she decided that they needed a home that reflected their new, rising status, Northwood Investments made another, much more personal, purchase. It was a house. A magnificent, architect-designed, 6,000-square-foot home in the city's most exclusive, gated community. It was a house of clean lines, of vast, empty spaces, of a cold, minimalist beauty that was the antithesis of my own warm, cluttered, comfortable life. The arrangement was simple. The house was an asset of Northwood Investments, provided to the CEO of Innovate Dynamics, my son, as part of his compensation package. A beautiful, tax-deductible cage. Thomas, in his blissful, hard-working naivete, never questioned the generosity of his silent, anonymous investors. He was just grateful. Veronica, however, was not just grateful. She was triumphant. The house was not a home to her. It was a stage. It was the backdrop for the perfect life she intended to perform. She filled it with expensive, uncomfortable furniture. She hosted lavish parties. She curated every corner of it for the benefit of her social media followers. She was the star of a show that she believed she had written, directed, and produced. She had no idea she was merely a tenant, living in a house owned by the quiet, dowdy old woman she so openly despised. My husband, Arthur, passed away 5 years ago. My world shrank. My quiet life became even quieter. Thomas, my sweet, worried son, insisted I move in with them. "Mom, you can't be rattling around in that old house by yourself," he said. "We have so much space. Veronica would love to have you." Veronica, when he asked her, put on a performance of flawless, daughterly concern. "Of course, darling," she cooed, stroking his arm. "Your mother is my mother. We would be honored to have her. She can have the guest suite. It has its own entrance. She'll be so comfortable." And so I moved into my own house. I, the owner, the landlord, the secret queen of the castle, moved into the guest suite, a small, sterile apartment over the garage, and became a silent, tolerated presence in the life of my own tenant. The mockery of my clothes was a constant, low-grade humiliation. Veronica was a disciple of designer labels. Her closet was a shrine to Gucci, Prada, and Chanel. My own wardrobe consisted of clothes I had owned for 20 years, well-made, sensible, and, in her eyes, utterly, hopelessly, unforgivably shabby. She would look at my favorite cardigan, a soft gray cashmere that I had mended at the elbows a dozen times, with a look of undisguised horror. "Beatrice," she would say, her voice a silken dagger. Is that the same sweater you were wearing yesterday?" "Yes, dear," I would reply calmly. "It's my favorite." "It has a hole in it," she would say, her lip curling in disgust. "I know," I would say. "I patched it. Adds character, don't you think?" She would just shudder and walk away. She never said the word cheap. She was too clever for that. But the word hung in the air between us, in her pitying glances, in her sighs of exasperation, in her constant, unsolicited offers to take me shopping. "Beatrice, we simply must get you some new things," she would say, her voice full of a false, bright cheerfulness. "There's a wonderful sale at Neiman Marcus. My personal shopper could pull some things for you, some simple, classic pieces, in black. It's so slimming." The implication was always clear. My clothes, my simple, comfortable, well-worn clothes, were an embarrassment to her. They were a stain on the perfect, glossy canvas of her life. They did not fit the aesthetic. I did not fit the aesthetic. The party was to be her greatest social triumph. It was a fundraiser for the local art museum, a cause she cared nothing about, but which attracted all the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. The party was not about art. It was about Veronica. It was her chance to cement her position as the new queen of the city's social scene. For weeks, the house was in a state of frantic preparation. Caterers, florists, and lighting designers swarmed through the vast white rooms. Veronica was in her element, a beautiful, tyrannical general, commanding her troops. I was, of course, expected to make myself scarce. But on the afternoon of the party, Veronica came to my guest suite. She was wearing a stunning silver sequined gown that looked like liquid moonlight. She was a vision of expensive, flawless beauty. "Beatrice," she said, her voice tight with a strained patience. "About tonight, I know you'll want to mingle, but the caterers will be using this back staircase. So perhaps it would be best if you just stayed up here. I'll have one of the staff bring you a plate." She was trying to banish me from my own party, in my own house. "Nonsense, my dear," I said with a calm smile. "I wouldn't miss it for the world. I'm looking forward to meeting your friends." A look of pure, cold panic flashed in her eyes. "But what will you wear?" she stammered. "Oh, I have the perfect thing," I said. My chosen outfit was my best dress. A simple, navy blue silk dress I had bought for my 30th wedding anniversary with Arthur. It was impeccably made, timeless in its design, and it fit me perfectly. I wore it with my favorite string of pearls, the ones Arthur had given me on the day Thomas was born. I felt elegant. I felt dignified. I felt like myself. When I walked down the main staircase and into the party, a hush fell over the small group of people standing near the bottom. They were all looking at me. And then I saw Veronica. She was standing with a group of her new, wealthy friends, a glass of champagne in her hand. She turned, she saw me, and her face, her beautiful, perfectly made-up face, contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She excused herself from her friends and glided over to me, her silver dress hissing on the marble floor. "Beatrice," she whispered, her voice a furious, venomous hiss. "What in God's name are you wearing? You look like a governess. A poor, provincial governess." "Yes. I am wearing my favorite dress, Veronica," I said calmly. "You are embarrassing me," she hissed, her eyes darting around to see who was watching. "You are embarrassing my husband. You are a joke. Look at you. In your cheap, old, homemade-looking dress. This is a party for important people. People who understand quality. And you look like you belong in a kitchen with the staff." Her words were meant to be daggers. They were meant to wound me, to humiliate me, to send me scurrying back to my room in tears. But they had the opposite effect. As I stood there, in my simple, elegant dress, being mocked by this shallow, cruel woman in her ridiculously expensive and ultimately meaningless gown, I felt a profound and deeply liberating sense of clarity. The war was over. The quiet, undeclared war I had been fighting for years, the war of polite smiles and bitten tongues, was finally, officially over. She had just fired the last, and most revealing, shot. I looked at her. I looked at this beautiful, insecure, and ultimately pathetic woman, who was so terrified of not being seen as rich that she had become blind to what it meant to be wealthy. And I smiled. A real smile. A warm, genuine, and deeply, deeply pitying smile. "My dear Veronica," I said, my voice clear and steady, loud enough for the people nearby to hear. "You are absolutely right. My dress is old. My pearls are old. I am old. But there is a difference between being old and being classic. And there is a difference between being expensive and being valuable. It is a lesson that some people sadly never learn." I patted her arm, a gesture of grandmotherly, condescending affection. "Now, if you'll excuse me," I said, "I see someone over there I'd like to talk to. I believe he's on the board of the museum. I have a few thoughts on their acquisition strategy I'd like to share." I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, her mouth slightly agape, a look of stunned, sputtering fury on her face. I had not raised my voice. I had not insulted her. I had simply and publicly exposed the vast, empty, and echoing chasm between her values and mine. The party, for her, was ruined. But for me, the real party, the party of my own liberation, was just beginning. And I knew exactly what the grand finale was going to be. The week following the fundraiser was a study in psychological warfare. The battle lines, once invisible, had now been drawn in the starkest of terms. In the aftermath of my quiet, public defiance, Veronica did not apologize. She did not retreat. She escalated. My crime had not been one of insolence, but of insubordination. I had, in front of her friends, refused to accept the role she had assigned me. And for that, I had to be punished. Her punishment was not physical. It was a campaign of chilling, deliberate exclusion. I was no longer just an invisible presence in the house. I was treated like a hostile entity. My meals, which had been brought to my suite with a veneer of polite duty, were now often forgotten. When I would eventually make my way to the kitchen, I would find her there, eating a late lunch, and she would look up at me with a look of feigned, surprised innocence. "Oh, Beatrice, I am so sorry. I completely forgot about you. I've been so busy. There are some leftovers in the fridge, I think." The leftovers would, invariably, be a small, sad, congealed portion of something undesirable. The house, my house, became a foreign country in which I was an unwelcome refugee. If I was sitting in the living room, reading a book, she would enter with a sigh, turn on the television to a loud, obnoxious reality show, and effectively drive me from the room. She was reclaiming her territory, one room at a time, making it clear that my presence in any shared space was an intrusion. My son, Thomas, was caught in the crossfire. He knew something had shifted after the party. He knew his wife was angry, and he knew his mother was different. My new, quiet, unyielding calm seemed to unnerve him more than any complaint could have. He tried to be a peacemaker, a role for which he was laughably ill-equipped. "Can't you two just try to get along?" he would plead, his face a mask of weary despair. "I have no idea what you're talking about, darling," Veronica would reply, her voice a sweet, poisonous melody. "Your mother and I are perfectly fine, aren't we, Beatrice?" She would turn her brilliant, false smile on me. "Perfectly, my dear," I would say, my own voice a quiet, placid echo. He was a man caught between two silent, smiling armies, and he had no idea that one of them had a secret, nuclear option. It was during this week of escalated Cold Warfare that I decided to act. The time for quiet observation was over. The time for a strategic counteroffensive had begun. I made the call the following Monday from a payphone at the public library. I did not want any record of the call on their home phone bill. I called Mr. Davies, my late husband's lawyer, a man whose loyalty was not to money, but to the memory of my Arthur. "Davies," I said when his secretary put me through. "It's Beatrice Dunn." "Beatrice!" His voice was a warm, welcome sound from a forgotten world. "It has been too long. How are you, my dear?" "I am in need of your services, Davies," I said, my voice low and clear. "It is time to awaken Northwood Investments." There was a moment of profound silence on the other end of the line. Davies was one of the few people on earth who knew the full story. He had helped Arthur set up the trust, the corporation, the entire intricate, anonymous structure. He understood the philosophy behind it. And he understood, without my having to say another word, that for me to make this call, something must be terribly, terribly wrong. "I see," he said finally, his voice now all business. "When and where?" We met 2 days later at his old, respectable, wood-paneled office downtown. It was the first time I had been in the city by myself in years. The taxi ride felt like a journey to a foreign country. I sat in the familiar leather chair opposite his large mahogany desk, and I laid out the situation. I told him everything. The move, the condescension, the party, the mockery of my clothes, the way I was being treated as a poor, embarrassing relation in a house that I, in fact, owned. He listened, his expression unchanging, his sharp, intelligent eyes fixed on my face. He was a man accustomed to stories of familial strife and financial greed. But as I spoke, I saw a familiar, cold, hard anger begin to form in his eyes. It was the same anger I now felt in my own heart. He was loyal to Arthur, and he saw Arthur's legacy, his philosophy, his very memory being desecrated by this shallow, materialistic woman. "So," he said when I had finished, "let me be clear. Your son, the CEO of the company that Northwood Investments owns a controlling interest in, is living, rent-free, in a multi-million-dollar corporate asset, while his wife, a woman of no discernible income, treats you, the actual owner of the property and the silent benefactor of their entire lifestyle, like a scullery maid." "That is an accurate summary of the situation, yes," I said. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, grim smile spreading across his face. It was the smile of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. "Oh, Beatrice," he said, "this is going to be a great deal of fun." Our plan was formulated with the precision of a corporate takeover. It was to be a slow, methodical, and utterly terrifying tightening of the screws. We would not attack Veronica directly. That would be too simple, too vulgar. We would attack the source of her power, her security, her entire sense of self-worth, her husband's career, and the beautiful house that was its primary symbol. Our first move was a letter. A week later, a thick, cream-colored envelope arrived at the house, delivered by a courier. It was not addressed to Thomas at home. It was addressed to Mr. Thomas Dunn, CEO, Innovate Dynamics, at his official place of business. But it was delivered to the house. A deliberate, subtle power move, a reminder that the investors knew where he lived. The letter was from the law firm of Davies, Roth, and Associates, on behalf of their client, Northwood Investments. The tone was cold, formal, and deeply intimidating. It began by acknowledging the recent, impressive growth of Innovate Dynamics. It then stated that the board of Northwood Investments, as the majority shareholder, had decided that it was a prudent time to conduct a full, comprehensive financial audit of the company's books, with a particular focus on executive compensation, corporate asset allocation, and non-essential expenditures. It informed him that a team of forensic accountants would be arriving at his office on Monday morning. The final paragraph was the masterstroke. Furthermore, it read, "We have noted that the corporate asset located at 127 Silverwood Drive is currently being utilized as a private residence for the CEO. While we applaud the company's growth, we must ensure that all assets are being leveraged for maximum shareholder value. As such, we require a full report on the justification for this residential arrangement, including a comparative market analysis of its potential rental income versus its value as an executive perquisite. This report is to be delivered to our office no later than the end of the fiscal quarter." I was in the kitchen, making myself a cup of tea, when Thomas came home that evening. He was holding the letter in his hand. His face was the color of ash. He walked past me as if I were a ghost, his eyes wide with a look of pure animal terror. He went into his study and closed the door. I heard him on the phone, his voice a low, frantic, panicked murmur. He was calling his own company's accountants, his lawyers. He was a man who had just seen a ghost, the ghost of his own anonymous, and heretofore silent, benefactor's taught. The audit, of course, was a work of theatrical genius. The team of accountants hired by Davies descended upon Thomas's office like a swarm of locusts. They were polite, professional, and utterly relentless. They requested every file, every receipt, every financial statement. They interviewed his staff. They created an atmosphere of quiet, intense, and deeply unsettling scrutiny. Thomas, my son, was thrown into a state of absolute panic. He had done nothing illegal, not really, but he had been careless. He had been living a life of comfortable, unquestioning privilege, funded by a river of money whose source he had never been forced to examine. He had mixed his personal expenses with his corporate ones. He had taken the beautiful house, the generous salary, the lavish expense account, all for granted. He had assumed his silent partners were content to remain silent forever. Now, the silent gods had begun to speak, and their first word was audit. The true beauty of the situation, the part I savored most, was that he could not share his terror with his wife. He was living a lie. He had allowed Veronica to believe that he was the sole architect of their success. He had let her believe that the house, the cars, the entire glittering edifice of their life was a product of his own genius, his own hard work. How could he now go to her and tell her the truth? How could he say, "Darling, it seems the anonymous, faceless corporation that has been funding our entire existence, the one that owns this very house, is suddenly asking some very uncomfortable questions. And, by the way, I have a terrible sinking feeling that the majority shareholder of that corporation might be my quiet, dowdy mother, the one you mocked for her old clothes." He could not, so he lied. He told her it was a routine audit, a normal part of doing business. But his anxiety was a palpable thing, a foul odor in their beautiful, sterile house. He was jumpy, irritable, and secretive. He would have long, whispered conversations on the phone, closing his office door. He would work late into the night, surrounded by a mountain of financial documents. Veronica, a woman whose entire universe revolved around her own feelings, her own status, her own needs, did not see a husband under professional pressure. She saw a husband who was hiding something from her. Her mind, a shallow pool of insecurities and cliches, immediately jumped to the most logical and most insulting conclusion. He was having an affair. The irony was so rich, so perfect, I could have wept with joy. Her own campaign of terror began. It was a mirror image of my own, but born not of righteous anger, but of a petty, jealous, and deeply insecure suspicion. She started checking his phone. She would scroll through his call logs, his text messages, searching for a woman's name she didn't recognize. She would question him relentlessly. "Who was that on the phone, Thomas? Why did you stop talking when I came into the room?" "It was just work, Veronica," he would say, his voice weary, his face etched with the strain of his double life. "You've been working so late recently," she would say, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Are you sure you're at the office?" Their perfect, minimalist house became the stage for a new, ugly drama. A drama of baseless accusations and frantic, truthful denials. Their marriage, which had been a business partnership disguised as a love affair, was now a war zone. And I was the quiet, invisible arms dealer, supplying the ammunition for both sides. I watched it all with a serene, detached satisfaction. I would sit in my guest suite, ostensibly reading a book, and I would listen to their arguments. I would listen to my son's desperate, tired lies, and to my daughter-in-law's shrill, unfounded accusations. It was a symphony of dysfunction, and I was its silent, invisible composer. The audit, of course, found exactly what Mr. Davies and I had instructed it to find. A pattern of financial irregularities. A series of questionable expenditures. The use of a multi-million-dollar corporate asset as a personal residence, with no formal lease agreement and no rent being paid, was, the report concluded, a significant and unjustifiable drain on shareholder value. The second letter from the law firm arrived a month after the first. It was even colder, even more intimidating than the last. It stated that, in light of the audit's findings, the board of Northwood Investments was calling an emergency, in-person meeting to discuss the future of Innovate Dynamics and the continued viability of its current CEO. The letter stated that the presence of the CEO, Mr. Thomas Dunn, was not optional. It also stated that, as a matter of corporate transparency, they strongly recommended that his wife, whose lifestyle was at the center of the financial irregularities, be in attendance as well. It was a summons, a command performance. I watched as Thomas read the letter, his face turning the color of wet cement. He was trapped. He was being summoned to a meeting with a ghost, and he was being asked to bring his suspicious, angry wife along with him. He could not tell her the truth, and he could not hide the meeting from her. He tried. He told her it was a mandatory, end-of-year financial review. But she was no longer a fool. Her own paranoia had made her a detective. "What law firm, Thomas?" she demanded. "Who are these people? Why do they want me there?" "It's just a formality, honey," he stammered. "No," she said, her eyes narrowed. "I don't believe you. You are hiding something. You are seeing someone. And this meeting, this is about you trying to pay her off, isn't it? You're using company money to support your mistress." The argument that followed was a spectacular operatic affair. It raged through the house for hours. It was a storm of her hysterical, wrong-headed accusations and his desperate, truthful, but ultimately unbelievable denials. In the end, she declared her own terms. "Fine," she said, her voice a low, trembling hiss. "I will go to your meeting. I will go, and I will meet this mysterious board. I will sit there, and I will listen. And I will find out, once and for all, exactly what kind of man I marry." The stage was set. The players were all in place. The emergency board meeting of Northwood Investments was scheduled for the following Friday, in the formal, intimidating boardroom of Davies, Roth, and Associates. My son was walking into his own execution. His wife was walking in, expecting to find evidence of an affair. And I, the quiet, broke, and useless old woman, was going to be sitting at the head of the table. The ghost was about to become the machine. The day of the board meeting was a beautiful, clear, autumn day. I chose my outfit with the care of a general preparing for a final, decisive battle. I did not wear my old mended cardigan. I did not wear my sensible shoes. I wore a beautifully tailored dark gray wool suit that I had not worn in years. I wore my favorite string of pearls. I had my hair professionally styled. I looked, I thought, like the woman I was. The quiet, powerful, and very wealthy widow of Arthur Dunn. I looked like the majority shareholder. Mr. Davies sent a private car to pick me up. A sleek, black town car with tinted windows. I instructed the driver to wait for me a block away from the house. I walked out to meet it, a small, elegant, and entirely anonymous woman. I arrived at the law firm an hour before the meeting was scheduled to begin. I sat with Davies in his office, and we went over the final details of our script. He was enjoying himself immensely. He had the righteous, gleeful energy of a man who was about to deliver a long overdue and exquisitely satisfying dose of justice. At precisely 2:00, his secretary announced that Mr. and Mrs. Dunn had arrived. "Let them wait," I said calmly. I took a sip of my tea. I wanted them to stew. I wanted them to sit in the silent, intimidating waiting room, surrounded by expensive art and bound legal volumes, and I wanted them to contemplate their respective, and equally misguided, theories about what was about to happen. We let them wait for 15 minutes. Then, Davies went out to greet them. As he described it to me later, the scene was a masterpiece of domestic and corporate tension. Thomas was pale, sweating, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. Veronica was a vision of cold, furious elegance. She was dressed for war, in a sharp, black power suit, her face a mask of defiant suspicion. She was there to confront her husband's mistress. She had no idea she was about to meet his boss. Davies escorted them into the boardroom. It was a large, intimidating room, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. At the far end of the table, sitting in the large, high-backed chairman's seat, was a single, empty chair. The other chairs were occupied by Davies and two of his most formidable-looking junior partners, who had been brought in to play the part of the board. "Please sit," Davies said, gesturing to the chairs opposite the empty one. Thomas and Veronica sat. The silence in the room was heavy, absolute. Davies began. He spoke in a low, formal, and deeply serious tone. He welcomed them on behalf of his client, Northwood Investments. He began to summarize the findings of the recent financial audit. He used words like fiscal irresponsibility, unauthorized expenditures, and breach of fiduciary duty. Thomas sank lower and lower in his chair, his face a miserable shade of gray. Veronica listened, her expression shifting from defiant anger to a confused, impatient boredom. This was not what she had expected. Where was the tearful mistress? Where was the messy personal drama? This was just boring business talk. And then Davies came to the matter of the house. "And finally," he said, his eyes fixed on Thomas, "we must address the significant issue of the corporate asset at 127 Silverwood Drive. The audit has concluded that the use of this property as a private, rent-free residence for the CEO constitutes an unsustainable and unacceptable allocation of corporate resources." Veronica's head snapped up. Her boredom was replaced by a sudden, sharp alarm. They were talking about her house. "What does that mean?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the formal atmosphere of the room. Davies turned his cool, lawyer's gaze on her. "It means, Mrs. Dunn, that the board of Northwood Investments has decided to reclaim the asset. The property will be sold at the end of the next fiscal quarter. You will, of course, be required to vacate the premises." "Sold?" she gasped, turning on her husband. "What is he talking about, Thomas? You told me the house was part of your compensation. You told me it was ours." Thomas couldn't speak. He just sat there, a portrait of pathetic, sweaty misery. "Perhaps," Davies said, a cruel, subtle smile playing on his lips, "it would be best if you discuss this matter with the actual owner of the property." He pressed a small, discreet button on the console in front of him. A moment later, the double doors at the far end of the boardroom opened, and I walked in. I walked slowly, my posture erect, my head held high. I was no longer the frail, shuffling old woman from the guest suite. I was Beatrice Dunn, the majority shareholder of Northwood Investments. I walked to the head of the table, and I stood behind the empty chairman's seat. Thomas saw me first. He let out a small, choked sound, a cross between a gasp and a sob. His face, which I thought could not get any paler, turned the color of old parchment. Veronica saw the direction of his gaze, and she turned. She saw me, standing there, in my elegant, dark gray suit. And her face, her beautiful, arrogant, confident face, simply collapsed. It was a slow-motion implosion of her entire reality. Her mind, her sharp, calculating mind, tried to process the impossible data. The poor, shabby mother-in-law. The powerful, anonymous corporation. The intimidating law firm. And me, standing at the head of the table. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, soul-shattering certainty. She looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish, no sound coming out. I looked down the long, polished mahogany table at her, at my son-in-law, at the woman who had mocked my old clothes. And I gave her a small, serene, and utterly triumphant smile. "Veronica," I said, my voice clear, steady, and filled with the quiet, unassailable authority of a woman who owns everything in the room, including the people. "You wanted to meet the board. I am the board." I pulled out the chairman's seat and sat down. "Now," I said, turning my gaze to my son-in-law, whose face was now buried in his hands, "shall we discuss the new terms of your lease?" The rest of the meeting was short, brutal, and deeply, deeply satisfying. I, through my lawyer, laid out the new reality. Innovate Dynamics was being restructured. Thomas, due to his financial mismanagement, was being demoted from CEO to a salaried head of product development. His salary was being cut by 60%. His expense account was being eliminated. And the house, my house, was being put on the rental market. Effective immediately. They had 30 days to sign a new lease at the full exorbitant market rate or vacate the property. Veronica just sat there, in a state of catatonic shock. The woman who had built her entire identity on a foundation of wealth and status had just had that foundation completely and irrevocably obliterated. Thomas, my son, did not say a word. He just sat there, weeping into his hands, a man mourning the death of a life he had never truly earned, and had now well and truly lost. They did not sign the new lease. They could not afford it. They moved out of my house a month later. They moved into a small, cramped rental apartment in a less fashionable part of the city, a place with beige walls and cheap carpets. Their marriage, which had been a partnership of ambition and greed, did not survive the downgrade. Without the stage of their beautiful house, without the fuel of my money, the performance was over. They divorced within the year. Thomas and I are rebuilding. It is a slow, difficult process. He is a humbled man, a man struggling to come to terms with the consequences of his own weakness. He is finally learning the difference between what something costs and what it is worth. And Veronica? I do not know what became of her. I do not follow her on social media anymore. I am told she is working, for the first time in her life, in a boutique, selling expensive clothes to women who are just like she used to be. I find a certain quiet, poetic justice in that. I, in the end, did not sell the house. I kept it, but I did not move back in. The memories there were too tainted. Instead, I did something my husband, Arthur, would have loved. I gifted the house, in its entirety, to a local charity that provides a safe haven for young, aspiring artists. It is now a residence, a place filled with the beautiful, chaotic, and creative energy of young people with dreams. It is no longer silent. It is filled with music, with the smell of paint, with the sound of life. It is, finally, a home. I learned a valuable lesson in all of this. The world will try to judge you by the clothes you wear, by the car you drive, by the house you live in. It will try to put a price tag on your soul. Do not let it. Your worth is not in the things you own. It is in your character, in your integrity, in the quiet, unassailable strength of your own heart. And sometimes, the most powerful thing in the world is not a loud display of wealth, but a quiet, hidden, and beautifully executed contract. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for seeing the value in it. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click that notification bell. In the comments below, tell me about a time you learned the difference between what something costs and what it is truly worth. Love you all. This is Grandma Beatrice, and I'll see you in the next story.